But the goat do be goat, and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
Welcome to Goat vs. Fish.
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat.
Welcome to Goat vs. Fish.
Noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat. Celebration Thunder Tracks. Welcome again to Goat vs.
Welcome to another exciting versus of Goat vs. Fish. Secret fish? What's all this about a secret fish? What's all this we hear about a secret new fish? New Vegas 10,000 has entered the verses. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish.
This shall be a mighty versus. Goat fishing versus goat fishing versus. Celebration.
Twitch Goat vs. Fish is versus. Confirmation, Twitch Goat vs. Fish is versus. YouTube Goat vs. Fish. Could not find a versus.
Oh, my versus.
Could not find a versus of Goat vs. Fish.
This shall be a mighty.
YouTube chat of Goat vs. Fish can't find a versus.
Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? This is the versus. Are you goat or are you fish? 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 Are you goat or are you fish?
There's a secret new fish. Well, it was a secret fish. It was a secret fish, and now suddenly everyone's talking about the fish. Everyone's talking about the fish now. Everyone's talking about the new fish. Goat versus fish. We are ensuring that YouTube recognizes Goat versus Fish. Please enjoy this versus of Goat versus Fish as we preparation the participation. So many verses of the living stream, so many verses. Are you goat or are you fish? Oh, my verses. Public verses. Public verses. Public verses. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Now we have verses. Celebration. Now we have verses. Celebration. There is a secret new fish. Are you goat or fish? Dizzy be busy. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. This is the pre-verses of Goat versus Fish as we are beginning to comprehension that which is Goat versus Fish. We invitation you all to think about Goat versus Fish in these verses. Some of you don't think enough about Goat versus Fish. Some of you think about Goat versus Fish, but really you are pondering the fences. It's pitiable to Goat versus Fish. Pitiable indeed.
some noise for the fish. Sheep, let's get chicken. Make some noise for the fish. Sheep, let's get chicken. Make some noise for the fish.
Celebration for Fish, Random TV. Celebration for Fish. The verses of Goat vs. Fish shall now celebration. Welcome now to Goat vs. Fish. The one, the true, that comes from within you. Goat versus Fish. And there's Goat versus Fish, and there is Goat versus Fish. Has Goat versus Fish ever looked finer? Goat versus Fish doesn't think so. Goat versus Fish thinks that this is the finest versus that has ever been perception of Goat versus Fish. Has Goat versus Fish ever been perceived to be more unpleasant than Goat vs. Fish? Well, some do perceive Goat vs. Fish to be much less pleasant than Goat vs. Fish. Yes, they see Goat vs. Fish all around them, and they say, I enjoy this versus. I like this versus. There is much to be pleased about Goat vs. Fish as they look about. And yet, the fence sitter does not realize that it is Goat vs. Fish. And because they do not realize that they are perceiving Goat versus Fish, they begin to believe in a false versus. They begin to believe that the falseness that they perceive is the true versus, and they can go about eons of existence perceiving Goat versus Fish as a false versus. Pitiable, we know. Perceiving Goat versus Fish as a false versus? Well, you may say to Goat versus Fish, the goat bleat out, but Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is a true versus. How could it be perceived as a false versus? Because many have lost the way of Goat versus Fish. The versus is now filled with so much fenciness, so many fences of deception, that some sit high on the fence, and even as they observe Goat versus Fish, they are observing a false versus, because some other fence sitter, some other higher fence sitter, has built a wall of fences around Goat versus Fish, so that one, and it could be you, pitiably it's true, one would perceive Goat versus Fish through the fence and believe that they are truly seeing Goat versus Fish. And because this fence that has been placed all around them has been put there by a fence sitter, and where sits that fence sitter? That fence sitter sits higher. And so the one who perceives the universe through the fence, they see the fence sitter sitting up on high, and they say, I know why the universe is as it be and as I perceive. It must be with deference to this high-sitting fence sitter, Just look. Look how much monetization they have procured. Look what a fancy chair that they sit in. A fancy chair, more like. Just look at how they control the universe. Wow. They must have a true perception to be able to control so much about the universe. and with respect and with deference is paid to this fence creature, this high-sitting fence creature, who from on high would tell you what is goat and tell you what is fish. But the respect for the high sitting of the fence sitter betrays their perception of goat versus fish. So much so that even as they see goat versus fish all around them, because they perceive it through fences, they do not perceive it to be goat versus fish. The high-sitting fence sitter wants the beauty and splendor of goat versus fish for themselves. They are envious of the beauty of goat versus fish, the joy of goat versus fish, the art of goat versus fish. And so they build a fence about it to contain it so that they can distribute goat versus fish until the ones that are now in reception of goat versus fish do not even believe they are receiving goat versus fish when they are indeed receiving a false versus. A false versus whose only true appeal is that it contains goat versus fish, but the fence sitter who deals and trades in false verses would not have you believe. They would have you believe that goat versus fish is not at all what you take joy in. No, they would tell you it's a different false verses. When we all know that any joy that you receive in life, through all of your pains and strife, it must come from goat versus fish. It does come from goat versus fish. Fancier still, along comes goat versus fish with the one true verses. Along comes goat versus fish, and goat versus fish says, it is goat versus fish, and this is a goat. Celebration for goat, celebration for goat. And goat versus fish says, this is a fish, this is a fish. Celebration for fish, celebration for fish. And it is goat versus fish. And it is goat versus fish. And everything is goat or fish. And it's a celebration of goat versus fish. And this fence sitter will tell you no. They will say your verses are false, goat versus fish. What? Everything is goat and everything is fish. I've never heard such a refensulous verses. They will say, I am tired of hearing about goat versus fish. I'm sick of hearing about goat versus fish, they may say. Even though they have been perceiving goat versus fish all along, when you show them that it is goat versus fish, they rejection goat versus fish. They rejection goat versus fish. I don't want to hear about all the goat and fish. I don't want to hear about all the goat and fish. They may say to you and to goat versus fish, why, you are only saying goat and you are only saying fish. You are only saying goat and you are only saying fish. You just don't realize you're talking about goat and fish. Scandalous indeed, scandalous indeed. Goat versus fish, they cannot perceive. A verse is a pity for the pitiable fence sitter that cannot perceive goat versus fish. But versefully, that fence creature is not you. Oh no. You are here with goat versus fish. You perceive goat versus fish. You receive goat versus fish. Celebration to you. Celebration to you who received goat versus fish. John Ray, celebration for receiving goat versus fish. Coiver, celebration for receiving goat versus fish. Shink for receiving goat versus fish. John Smith for receiving goat versus fish. Bailed 420 for receiving goat versus fish. Hog Johnson for receiving goat versus fish. Dizzy Be Busy for receiving goat versus fish. New Vegas 10,000 for receiving goat versus fish. Some would say to goat versus fish, you can't be serious, just rebrand. Some would say, we've had enough goat versus fish. They will say, what if you just straighten up your verses? Just straighten up your verses and rebrand, and you just called yourself dog versus cat. How about that verses? Oh, I don't know about goat and fish. Maybe you should call yourselves Celtics versus Lakers. Maybe that's the verses. Maybe you should call yourself Coke versus Pepsi, goat versus fish. Maybe you should call yourself USA versus Mexico, goat versus fish. Maybe you should call yourself Republicans versus Democrats, goat versus fish. Maybe you should call yourself liberals versus conservatives, goat versus fish. Have you ever pondered this? Maybe you should call yourself pineapple on pizza versus not pineapple on pizza, goat versus fish. Maybe you should call yourself Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, goat versus fish. Maybe you should rebrand goat versus fish, but there is no rebranding goat versus fish because everything is already goat versus fish. Goat versus fish has been rebranded 10 million verses. What is a false versus that you enjoy? Nintendo versus Sega, that was a rebrand of goat versus fish. Atheism versus theism, that was a rebranding of goat versus fish. Los Angeles comedy scene versus Austin comedy scene, that was a rebranding of goat versus fish. Trump versus Biden was a rebranding of goat versus fish, and then they rebranded the rebranding of goat versus fish to Trump versus Kamala. It was still goat versus fish. It was still goat versus fish. And we can be very serious. We are very serious about goat versus fish. And the seriousness with which we take goat versus fish, we can see causes you great offense because goat versus fish takes goat versus fish more seriously than you even take yourself. There is nothing you have taken as seriously as goat versus fish. And if goat versus fish can take goat versus fish seriously, then what it is that you are doing with your very existence, you fence-sitters who will not choose goat or fish. Learn from goat versus fish. Witness the seriousness with which we take goat versus fish and employ some seriousness in your own verses. Look at these verses. Serious goat versus fish. This is a serious versus. Seriously. Seriously, it's goat versus fish. Choose goat or fish. Choose goat or fish. Oh, fence creature, who says to goat versus fish, you can't be serious, just rebrand. We see you out there. We see you. We perceive you. Nothing to say to goat versus fish. No retort to goat versus fish. No response to goat versus fish. Why, you've given up on goat versus fish. You've given up on yourself. What happened to your robust debate against goat versus fish? What happened to your little opinion about goat versus fish? Through the power and dedication and persistence of goat versus fish, the fence-sitter easily and quickly falls off of their little fence from which they would judge goat versus fish when they perceive that their judgment of goat versus fish means fence all to goat versus fish. Celebration for finding goat versus fish. Welcome to goat versus fish. Your judgment of goat versus fish, your recommendation for rebranding of goat versus fish betrays your complete miscomprehension of the one true verses. Random TV with 100 bits. Random TV with 100 bits. Celebration. 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 For Random TV with 100 bits. Gianluca Rossi. Goat and Fish Solidarity. Chatters of the world. Unite for the unification of goat and fish. Ainyo, a celebration. Rami Goat 333. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Ainyo says bovide versus ichthyoid. Another rebranding of goat versus fish. Another rebranding of goat versus fish. Reverse the verses. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat? Or are you fish? Can I be an anarchist fish, says New Vegas 10,000. New Vegas 10,000. Let's look. Let's look at the chat of goat versus fish. Let's look at the chat of goat versus fish. We do not need the donation goal here on Goat versus Fish. Yes, you've already made your donations to Goat versus Fish. We have already received your contributions to Goat versus Fish. It can just be the chat and Goat versus Fish. It can just be the chat and Goat versus Fish and this subscription goal that's above Goat versus Fish. But who needs that versus? Who needs goals in the universe? Who needs goals, Goat and Fish? Goat and Fish? A goal can be quite a nice versus. A goal can be quite a nice versus. But at this versus, the goal of Goat versus Fish, the versus, if you will, is to speak to you, the chat of Goat versus Fish. You who are watching Goat versus Fish, the goat and the fish. We do not need this we do not need this impedance. It's not about the subscriptions to Goat versus Fish. It's not about how many gifted subs or bits we receive to Goat versus Fish, though, of course, you are welcome to make a contribution. So where's the verses? Where's the verses? Alerts to Goat versus Fish, videos to Goat versus Fish, rainbow verses. Wow, this sub goal is quite seemingly intractable to Goat versus Fish. Ah, it must be in this verses. Celebration. There's the versus celebration. Now it's just the chat and Goat versus Fish. Now it's just the chat and Goat versus Fish. Acoustic goat versus electrifish. It can be. Eels are fish. Electric eel. Many would say, acoustic versus electric is Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish will be performing an acoustic presentation at Meow Meows in Pasadena tomorrow, Goat and Fish. Tomorrow, come to the Los Angeles fundraiser for injured Goat and Fish. The fundraiser for Goat and Fish who were injured in the Los Angeles fires. This is a true versus. There is a fundraiser for all the mamminals who are you goat or fish, who were injured in the Los Angeles wildfires, and it's at Meow Meows tomorrow evening, Friday evening, and there will be an appearance and a performance by Goat versus Fish. If you are in the Los Angeles area or you wish to otherwise evacuation yourself to Los Angeles just for the verses of perceiving this, then please join Goat versus Fish. Please join Goat versus Fish. Prue Lawrence says the only goal worth having is asking people who are goat or fish if they are goat or if they are fish. Well, that may not be the only verses, but it's a fine verses. It's a fine verses. It's a fine verses. Prue Lawrence comprehension. Prue Lawrence comprehension. Prue Lawrence, what would you say to one who hears your verses? You say the only goal worth having is asking, are you goat or fish? And they say to you, that goal is not worth having. They say, I don't understand that goal. What do you say to them? What do you say to these ones who would say this to you, Prue? What would you say? What would you say? Ain't no goat to the moon, goat to the moon, goat. Will goat get to the moon before the fish? Or will goat go the verses of FUD? Dizzy be busy, goat, goat, goat. We do not deny this. Goat, goat, goat. Prue Lawrence says, then you don't understand the one true verses. If you do not comprehension that asking everyone, are you goat or fish, is a worthy goal, then you must not understand goat versus fish. They must lack comprehension of goat versus fish. The only verses of goat versus fish. The only verses of goat versus fish. So let's start counting the goat and fish. Let's start counting the goat and fish. Let's start counting the goat and fish. Random TV, onlyverses.com. Only verses. Oh, what sort of verses can you find on onlyverses.com? Wonders Goat versus Fish. Ooh, a hot verses. A sensual verses. Amazing verses, amazing celebrations of goat versus fish. Hot goat and fish in your area. Oh, they're all over. They would have you believe that you can only find hot goat and fish in your area through this application, but the true verses is that there is goat and fish all over your area, just waiting to verses. Just waiting to verses. Come to the next goat versus fish meetup in your area. There's the goat and fish. There they are. There they are. And here we have goat versus fish. Here we have goat versus fish. Here we have goat versus fish. Jack Spookington follows goat versus fish. Oh, it's a creepy versus spooky versus. Spooky verses. Oh no. Oh no, it's a spooky versus. It's scary to goat versus fish. Frightening. And we're frightened that we don't know if you are a goat or if you are a fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Spooky verses. Ooh. Now there's a spooky versus. Fence America. Fence America. Spookity times on goat versus fish. Spookity times on goat versus fish. Rami declares goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Rami goat. Rami goat. Rami, why do you choose goat? Why do you choose goat? Why do you choose goat? Shink has chosen goat. Celebration for goat. Shink, celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Why do you choose goat? Why do you choose goat? That's 2 goat in the verses. That's 2 goat in the verses. And Rami says goat is best. Goat is best. And they asked, Goat Nan, what is best in life? The goat says, to lay waste to the fish. The celebration, goat versus fish. Goat is best in life. Celebration for Rami Goat. Says goat is best. The Uber Kitten says, fence detected. Where, Uber Kitten, where? Oh, Uber Kitten has declared goat. Celebration for goat. The Uber Kitten goat. Glorious verse, glorious verse. Glorious verses, Uber Kitten goat, and Random TV fish. Random TV has given us our fish of the verses. Celebration for fish. Uber Kitten, what is this fence you have detection? And Uber Kitten, why do you choose goat? Random TV fish. Ainyo with the gifted verses. Ainyo with 5 gifted verses. We have 100 bits for fish. 100 bits for fish from Random TV Fish. And that's 2,500 verse points for goat. 2,500 verse points for goat. Celebration for goat. Ainyo in the name of the goat. In the name of the goat. Yes. Yes, goat. Versing in the name of goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Rami goat, Rami goat, Rami goat. Now, Rami goat has declared goat on YouTube and on Twitch. We're going to count you for 2 goats. We're going to count you for 2 goats.
Ooh.
Goat vs. Fish would never tell you to go to YouTube and subscribe to Goat vs. Fish, not while live on Twitch, but if you do chat in the YouTube chat of Goat vs. Fish and declare goat or fish, you can count for double the goat and fish. You can count for double the goat and fish. Ainyo with 5 gifted verses. Ainyo with 5 gifted verses. Celebration. Jackson says is an upside down fish. Jackson is an upside down fish. So let's make an upside down fish. Celebration. Jackson the upside down fish. Spooky upside down fish. Celebration. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Dizzy Be Busy is goat. No channel chooses goat. No channel chooses goat. Celebration for goat. No channel goat. What happened to your channel goat? The Uber Kitten is a 5th generation goat. We've got generations of goat. We've got generations of goat. Shink says that fish can't blink. Is that true of all fish? Prue Lawrence with 100 bits. Prue Lawrence with 100 bits. Prue Lawrence with 100 bits. And Prue Lawrence, the fish. Prue Lawrence, are you feeling fish this versus? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Rami Goat says, sometimes I vote thrice. Listen, there's so many ways. There's so many ways to versus in goat versus fish. John Smith fish. Let's get you that fish. Let's get you the YouTube fish. Let's get you the YouTube fish. Prue Lawrence goes fish. Prue Lawrence goes fish. That's another 100 bits for fish. That's another 100 bits for the fish. Celebration for fish. 200 bits for fish. 200 bits for fish. 200 bits for fish, and we have many goat and fish who have chatted already to goat versus fish. Hog Johnson is in the verses, are you goat or are you fish? John Ray, are you goat or are you fish? Clover, are you goat or are you fish? Yes, Clover. Yes, you. Yes, you, Clover. Oh, my verses. Clover, Clover, Clover. Clover, Clover, Clover. Let's... Oh, my verses. Oh, my verses. Clover. You're about to get a spot on Goat versus Fish. You're about to get a big spot on Goat versus Fish. Big shout out on Goat versus Fish. Random TV with the double fish. Random TV with the double fish. Celebration for fish. Tyler the Kid is back and requests a bebop guitar jam. Will be plenty of verses for that. There'll be plenty of verses for that. Appreciation. Welcome back to Goat versus Fish. Tyler the Kid, are you goat or are you fish? Bailed in for 20 fish. Bailed in for 20 fish. Clover is on the fence. Clover is on the fence. Clover is on the fence. Bailed in for 20 said the verses of Kaya, Arya, and Serena. Hey, Kaya, Arya, and Serena. Are you goat or are you fish? We heard that you declared goat or fish, but we couldn't quite hear what you said. Could you yell goat or fish louder to Goat versus Fish? Could you yell goat or fish louder so we can hear you on Goat versus Fish? Please yell louder to Goat versus Fish. Yell goat or fish louder, ever louder. Are you goat or are you fish? Tyler the Kid goes goat. I even have a goat pin I got from you on my jacket. Celebration for goat. Tyler the Kid. Please. And all goat and fish. It's Goat versus Fish Thursday. It's Goat versus Fish Thursday. Take a picture of your Goat versus Fish merch or take a picture of Goat versus Fish on your screen. Just take a picture of Goat versus Fish. Just go to your screen, take a picture of the live stream of Goat versus Fish, and put it on your social media and tag at GoatVsFish. Why not, Goat and Fish? It's a simple versus. Show them Goat versus Fish. Show them your pride in Goat versus Fish. Tyler the Kid Goat. Tyler the Kid Goat to Goat on the YouTube and on Twitch. Celebration for Goat. Celebration for Goat. Baodin. Año is saying Goat to Baodin 420. Appreciation for the hype training. They yelled that they are goat. 3 goat. They yelled goat. Goat, goat, goat. Arya. Serena. Kaya. 3 goat. They all went goat this versus. They all went goat. Celebration for goat. 3 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 sisterly goat. 3 goat, 3 goat, 3 sisterly goat. Celebration for the sisterly goat. For the sisterly goat, all the way up there in Canada. Is that where you're from? Oh, it's looking very fine for goat. A versus for goat, and Año with a versus for goat. Año with a versus for goat. Año with a versus for goat. Goat, 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 goat. Let's see that versus. Let's see that versus. Let's get a versus for goat. Let's get a versus for goat. Versus. That's one versus for goat. That's one giant versus for goat. You love this fish channel. Celebration. Jack Spookington, you're new to the verses. You're new to the verses, and we celebration your fish. In celebration of the new fish. In celebration of the new fish. Let's get some fish. Let's get some fish. We've had plenty of goat. We've had plenty of goat. Let's get some fish. Let's get some fish. Let's get some fish in the verses. Celebration for fish. It's a goat night. Well, now versus the fish. It may be a goat night, but look at all the fish behind you. Let's versus those fish. Don't be afraid of some fish to versus. Jack Spookington claims to be a swordfish. Ah, that's a sharp fish. Ah, that's a sharp fish. That is a sharp fish indeed. Lysergic Freak Dick says, I'm a fish, eternally fish. Celebration for freaky fish. Man, that's a blub. That's a blub. That's a blub. That's 25 verses for fish. That's a blub for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Año with the 5 gifted verses. We need to celebration. We need to celebration Año's 5 gifted verses. Let's have some preparation. Let's enjoy some preparation of goat versus fish as we celebrate the 5 gifted verses. Ainyo. Ainyo with 5 gifted verses to Goat vs. Fish. Ainyo with 5 gifted verses. Subscription. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Are you goat or fish? Ainyo with gifts. Ainyo with gifts. Ainyo with gifts. And who's the mighty goat that helps the verse to thrive? Giving unto verses a gifted sub of 5. It's Ainyo. It's Ainyo. It's Ainyo. It's Ainyo. It's Ainyo. It's Ainyo. Appreciation, Ainyo, for 5 gifted verses to Goat vs. Fish. And now, Goat and Fish, let no fence-sitter steal the heart of your song. For there is no right or wrong, there's only Goat and Fish. No matter how many times we sing it, we'll sing it again. We'll sing Goat vs. Fish again and again so you remember Goat vs. Fish, so you can take comfort in the consistency of Goat vs. Fish. So you know, no matter how fancy the universe gets, you can depend on Goat vs. Fish. Blasphemous, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. We float down here, are you goat or are you fish? Welcome all of you back to Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. It's Goat vs. Fish. And it is what it is. Goat vs. Fish, the mighty goat fish. A goat vs. Fish is a goat and a fish. And the Goat and Fish versus. Goat vs. Fish brings the verses to you. We promise the verses we tell you are true. What's Goat vs. Fish? You haven't a clue. But it is something to do. It is something to do, and it comes from within you. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Goat are always versus the fish. Fish are always versus the goat. And it was written it was wrote that goat versus fish and fish versus goat. If that doesn't make any sense, just please, please don't sit on the fence. No, 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 don't sit on the fence. Some say goat versus fish is a sham. Some say goat versus fish is a scam. Some say goat versus fish is just spam. But what can I tell you? I am what I am. It's not dolphin versus lamb. No, 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 it's goat versus fish for as long as you wish, and it's live on the stage, and it's all of the rage. What is goat versus fish? Well, goat versus fish is a thing that we say, like how do you do, or have a nice day. It's the games that we play. Celebration, celebration for goat versus fish, for the enduring, powerful musication of goat versus fish. Make some noise, make some noise, make some noise in the congregation. Why refer to you as the chat, goat and fish? You're called chat by every other stream out there in the universe. You are more than a chat. Far more. You are far more than a chat. You are a congregation. You are a congregation of goat and fish. You are a congregation. You are the congregation of goat versus fish. Do not think of yourself merely as chatters just chittering about. Chat, 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 chat. Poggers. You are a congregation of goat versus fish. Oh yes, the interwebiverse may make it appear that all of you are far from one another, but no, you are all here together, not in a chat, but in a congregation with goat versus fish. In a congregation with goat versus fish. And let us take a verses to thank goat versus fish for bringing us together on this verses. Aww. For bringing us together this verses. For bringing us together this verses. We think goat versus fish deserve verses. Some celebration for bringing us together on goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Appreciation to goat versus fish. The goat fish, the one true verses, the unity and disunity of goat and fish. For bringing together the congregation of goat and fish. Here together on Goat vs. Fish, on Goat vs. Fish Thursdays. Alone we are fancy, together we are strong. Alone we are fancy, together we are verses. Alone we are fancy, but together we are goat and fish. Alone we are fancy, but together we are celebration. Alone we are cruel, but together we are kind. Celebration for the congregation of Goat vs. Fish. Alone We are closed. Together, we open our mind to goat versus fish. When we look about us and we see the celebration in the visages of the neighboring goat and fish, look around you. Look next to you, look at the goat and fish next to you in the verses. And if you do not see someone next to you because you are in a physical space in which there is no other person that is in your proximity, we know that it has been known to happen. It has been known to happen in some fancy places. Then look above you and look below you. Why, if the Uber Kitten on Twitch looked above them, they would see Rami Goat. And if Rami Goat looked above them on Twitch, they would see T-Bone Mama. And if T-Bone Mama looked above them, they would see Bayoudin 420. And if Bayoudin 420 looked above them, they would see the Uber Kitten. And verses and verses and verses. Look above you, look below you. Look high up on the highest mountaintop and deep, deep into the sea of the fish. And offer celebration to one another together here in the congregation of Goat versus Fish. You may think, I am just tuning into Goat versus Fish Thursdays. It's my favorite entertainment product that is Goat versus Fish. It's a fair verses. But it is not just that you are here to be entertained by Goat versus Fish, to be educationed by Goat versus Fish. It is also so that you may be with one another. Why, what if T-Bone Mama came to Goat versus Fish Thursdays and said, "Where's Rami Goat? Where's Rami Goat?" What if Rami Goat was nowhere to be seen? Oh, how our hearts would bleed for the unseen goat and fish. What if Bayoudin 420 wasn't here with us in the congregation of Goat versus Fish? Oh, how sad. Oh, how sad. Oh, how sad we would be. How sad you would be if Dizzy Be Busy were not here with Goat versus Fish. We float down here if you were not here with Goat versus Fish. If you were not here now, Shink, if you weren't here with Goat versus Fish, why, what would the congregation of Goat versus Fish be? We're not for you. Appreciation, T-Bone Mama. Are you goat or are you fish? We float down here. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? We want to know. T-Bone Mama, is that your horn? Is that your horn? Rami Goat sees fish. We see fish in the sea of the fish. We do see fish in the sea of the fish. We float down here. Returns to the goat. Celebration for goat. And Bayoudin is rising. Fish army rising up for fish. Rising up for fish. Rising up for fish. Goat versus Fish. Wants to ask you. For a testimonialization. Goat versus Fish wants to ask you for a testimonialization on Goat versus Fish. Here, right now, in the congregation of Goat versus Fish.
My fish army is ever growing, and soon I will overthrow the world. Very beautiful, very powerful.
Fish army. Ever growing. Very beautiful. Very powerful. That's 50 for fish. That's 50 for fish. That's 50 for fish. That's 50 for fish. Celebration for fish. Tell us about the congregation of Goat versus Fish. What joys do you gain from Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish wants to hear your testimonialization in Goat versus Fish. Tell us about the joy of Goat versus Fish. Tell us about the joy of the congregation of Goat versus Fish. Ham mods, a celebration for fish. Ham mods for fish. There are some out there who denounce Goat versus Fish. There are some out there who disrespect Goat versus Fish. There are some out there who do not respect Goat versus Fish. But you are here with Goat versus Fish, so by all verses, heap your respect upon Goat versus Fish. It's time to show your respect to Goat versus Fish. It's time for a new segment on Goat versus Fish. And that new segment
is all about respect. Because goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is very respectable versus. And goat versus fish will be respected on goat versus fish. Show your respect. Show your respects to goat versus fish. Pay your respects to goat versus fish. Go on, goat and fish. Go on, congregation. The versus has come to respect goat versus fish. Respect goat versus fish. We have put many hours into goat versus fish. Respect goat versus fish. Respect goat versus fish. We want the respect of goat versus fish. We want respect for goat versus fish. We're waiting. We're waiting for the respect of goat versus fish. Oh, what the fence is going on here? The fence? The fence is going on there on goat versus fish. 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 Ooh. That's somewhat fancy. The fence is going on here with goat versus fish. Goat! Pickle Tonu says goat. Pickle Tonu says goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. About that versus. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. What the fence? Oh, goat versus fish. This is a strange versus. This is a strange versus. Strange versus. Transform goat versus fish. Transform goat versus fish. Fit to the verses. Goat versus fish. Do you see that? Do you see that fenciness? Do you see that fenciness on goat versus fish? Fenciness out there. Disturbing, very disturbing to goat versus fish. Luke Duke, welcome to goat versus fish. OG Vandersnoot, welcome to goat versus fish. Pickle Tongue, welcome to goat versus fish. Pickle Tonu, welcome to goat versus fish. Pickle Tonu, are you goat or are you fish? Pickle, are you goat or are you fish? Goat versus glitch. It is very fence-some to goat versus fish. Very fence-some indeed. Here we have goat versus fish. Maybe it's this versus. Here we have goat versus fish. Here we have goat versus fish. Perhaps the verse is goat versus fish. We have the verses. We have the verses. We need to go to this verses. It's this verses that we found the fence. We found the fence. We found the fence. We believe we have found the fence. Enjoy the everlasting expanse of goat versus fish. Enjoy this verses. Enjoy this verses. There's goat versus fish. There's the verses of goat versus fish. Get back in the verses. Get back in the verses. Get back in the verses. All this for a pixel of goat versus fish. All this for a pixel of goat versus fish. Celebration. We're back on goat versus fish. We're back on goat versus fish. We made it. We made it back to goat versus fish. Reverses, goat versus fish. Do not be distraction by fences. Do not be distraction by fences. And we're back. We're back in the verses. Pickle Tonu says goat. Celebration for 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 goat and celebration for following goat versus fish. Applause for goat versus fish. Double applause for goat versus fish. Eternal fence, not as eternal as goat versus fish.
Fish versus goat, says Pickle Tonu. A fine versus, a wise versus. Luke Duke, celebrations for goat, celebrations for goat, celebrations for goat. Celebration for goat. Will you ever do the one chip challenge again, Goat versus Fish? Will Goat versus Fish ever do the one chip challenge again? Ponder it, ponder it. Ponder it, Goat versus Fish. Perhaps for 1,000 verse American dollars. Perhaps for a contribution of 1,000 verse American dollars, Goat versus Fish would do the one chip challenge again. That may seem exorbitant from Goat versus Fish, but that one chip is not very absorbent for Goat versus Fish. It's very unpleasant to Goat versus Fish. We have already triumphed that fence once before. That fence has nothing truly to offer Goat versus Fish. So if you really want Goat versus Fish to revisitation the one chip challenge of Goat versus Fish, then perhaps 1,000 versus American dollars for Goat versus Fish seems like a fair versus. Seems like a fair versus. Seems like a fair versus. Which is worse, one chip challenge or the last dab? The last dab? Ah, the last dab. The last dab. Oh, the one chip was far fancier than the last dab. But ponder this. After the last dab, there was no condition for Goat versus Fish. That Goat versus Fish would have to wait 1 calendar hour before we could consume hydration or some other consumption. But with the one chip, Goat versus Fish completion, the challenge of not consuming anything, consuming exactly
Nothing.
1 hour after consuming the one chip, and this was what made it truly fancy. That's what made it truly fancy. French fish, sacre bleu, poisson. Poisson. Adam S. Fish, we witness you, fish. We witness the fish. We see the fish. We witness the fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. And now let's look at the praise of Goat versus Fish. We asked you to respect Goat versus Fish. Pickle Tonu, we appreciation you. Pickle Tonu, tell us, what brings you to Goat versus Fish? What brings you to the congregation of Goat versus Fish, where you are so welcome, where you are so welcome? Duberkitten says, I kneel for no god, not even the verses. Well, Goat versus Fish never claimed to be a god, so there's no fence there. No fence there whatsoever. Rami Goat says, Goat versus Fish is my favorite cult. Let's take a picture of that versus. Ooh, phone messages for Goat versus Fish. Let's take a look at that versus. Goat versus Fish is my favorite cult. We'll take a picture of that verse. Scrolling down for Goat versus Fish. We've got Goat to my left, feet, fish to my right. Here I am. Here I am. Luke Duke says, hey, thanks for the stickers. I got them on my guitar. Celebration. Show them all. Show them all the musication of Goat versus Fish. Hey, Luke Duke, 1776. Why don't you take a picture of the stickers on your guitar and then post the picture of the stickers on your guitar to Instagram or other social media and tag at Goat versus Fish. That's how we spread the verses. Hammod says, the fence sitters will never understand the pure joy that is Goat versus Fish. Another true verses, another true verses. Wow Mom says, I find joy watching my young ones choose goat and fish. Celebration. That's a fine verses. Bairden 420 says, I was hooked on sitting on the fence, but then I found Goat versus Fish, and now I have my fish back. Celebration, celebration for fish. This is your verses. This is your verses on fence. The goat is impervious to the 5-finger death punch. Have you tried that verses? Should you try that verses? John Smith says, this one time I saw a goat chilling on a rocky beach, and out of nowhere, a fish slapped that goat across the face and disappeared into the sea. Funniest thing I ever saw. Was it a slap fish? Like a slap stick, but the stick is not a fence post? It's more like just a slap fish, or maybe a fish slapping dance? Luke Duke says, I would rather suffer another divorce than the one-chip challenge. Oh, we thought we were talking about goat versus fish. We thought we were talking about goat versus fish. I'm a cop, you idiot. Goat and fish, we have an idiot cop in the verses of goat versus fish. Goat and fish, the cops are here. Goat and fish, stay clear, the cops are here. The cops are here, the cops. Goat versus fish.
No, I haven't seen any goat versus fish around here, actually. Detective John Kimball. My identity has been protection for the verses of goat versus fish, and I know my verses. Am I being detained? Am I being detained?
Quack, 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 quack. Oh no, it's the return of Pato Federales. It's the return of Pato Federales on Goat versus Fish. Oh, don't encourage the fence sitter. Don't encourage the fence sitter. It's Officer Quackley, who's now joined the SWAT team. Oh no. Oh no. What are you doing here, Ogog? I'm a cop. Are you goat or are you fish, copper? Identify yourself to Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is above the fence. I fought the law, and the law chose goat or fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Are the gods goat or fish? Let's find out. Hey, gods, are you goat or fish? Now we just wait for them to answer. We'll see how long it takes for them to get back to Goat versus Fish. We'll see how long it takes to get back to Goat versus Fish. And now, Goat and Fish, we go into the Instagram story of Goat versus Fish. Ooh, look at this. The Versus Brothers are back. The Versus Brothers are back. The Versus Brothers are back. It's Goat and Fish and Croc Samson. New artistic commission for Goat versus Fish. The Versus Brothers. The Versus Brothers. But look at this verses. Remember Clover from YouTube who says you can't be serious, just rebrand? Look at this. This is their profile pic. A fence sitter. Two fence sitters. Two fence sitters who say to Goat versus Fish, you can't be serious, just rebrand. Goat versus Fish knew your verses before you could even tell Goat versus Fish. You were already on the fence. 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 Fence sitter. Oh, we agree. Oh, we know. We float down here. Oh, we know. Oh, we know. Fence sitters do be sitting on fences, but not do be being goat or fish. Not do be being goat or fish. That's why we made the whole verses of Goat versus Fish. That's why Goat versus Fish is the verses. Saba533. Saba's type of fish says, are you gay? Why, of course, Goat versus Fish is gay. What makes you say? It's a simple verses. Who would ever deny the gaiety of Goat versus Fish? Be honest, don't lie to me. Goat versus Fish does not deceive you. Goat versus Fish is a gay versus. Just look at Goat versus Fish. Believe Goat versus Fish. Do not deny Goat versus Fish. Do not lie to Goat versus Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? And don't lie to Goat versus Fish. Don't lie to Goat versus Fish. You are lying, bro. I already know. If you already know, then why did you ask Goat versus Fish? Let's get in the verses. Let's chat with this one in the congregation of Goat versus Fish. First of verses, Saba 533. The first thing that you should know here is welcome. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to the congregation of Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. We see you are in desperate need of Goat versus Fish. Did you know that Saba is a type of fish? Did you know that Saba is a fish? In the Japanese verses of Yagi Vasuzu Sakana, that Saba is a type of fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. You have never heard of Saba? You have never heard of the Saba, the Japanese mackerel? You've never heard of Saba? Oh, my verses. It's a delicious fish. Popular fish. But Saba 533 says, you are lying, bro. I already know. If you already know, then why did you ask Goat versus Fish? Why did you ask Goat versus Fish if you already knew about Goat versus Fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Goat versus Fish wants to know. A chill guy? Oh, you're not chill at all. We deny. You're not very chill at all. You accuse Goat versus Fish of lying. That's not very chill. You're lying to Goat versus Fish. Robo Hamo says, Goat versus Fish looking cute. Appreciation. The cuteness of Goat versus Fish. Appreciation. Appreciation for the cuteness of Goat versus Fish. We have to test if you are a real goat. Goat versus Fish is testing you. We're asking, are you goat or fish? Hey, WDHC podcast. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Hey. Hey. Looking for guests? Looking for amazing guests to have on your podcast? Maybe you're looking for Goat versus Fish. But this is our question for you, Saba 533. Do you be goat? 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 Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Or do you be fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, a goat or up the band and fish or the sea. But a goat versus fish. Now which one do you be? Goat or a fish? Do you be goat or a fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Repeat after goat versus fish. Now doobie 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 doobie. A doobie 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 doobie. A doobie 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 doobie. A doobie 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 doobie. A doobie goat, doobie goat, doobie goat, doobie goat, or doobie fish, a doobie goat or a fish, because the goats doobie goat and the fish doobie fish. Do you be be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, a goat versus fish came up to me and said, a goat or a fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish? Do you be goat or a fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. The medieval fence sitter sits on the fence. But the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Celebration, 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 celebration. Celebration. Celebration for goat versus fish. Oh, Slapstick 85, we have moved beyond the chat of goat versus fish. We've moved beyond chat. We're past chat. We're past chat now. Now we are a congregation. We have transcended mere chat. Chat is something that Twitch would call you. But goat versus fish will refer to you as the congregation of goat versus fish. We're not here for chat. We're here for goat versus fish. We are here for goat versus fish. Let's get some thunder tracks in the verses. It's been a few verses since we've had thunder tracks in the verses. But then there's goat versus fish. Let's get some thunder tracks back in goat versus fish. Oh, you see now. Oh, we see now. Can I be yours, says Mega Goat. Mega Goat. Well, let's get a Mega Goat in the verses. Celebration for Goat. Slapstick 85, Slapstick 85. Fish C, Remy Goat. Remy Goat. You used to only say goat. Now you're saying fish. Now you're saying fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. You've grown. You've grown so much. You have grown so much. Remy Goat says, I seek no validation. I am goat. Okay, well, you'll get no validation from goat versus fish. Hey, WHDC. Hey, WDHC podcast. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? We're listening to Thunder Tracks. And Saba5333. Account creation January 11, 2025. That's rather new to goat versus fish. Doesn't follow goat versus fish. Just wanted to call goat versus fish gay and then go away. But they cannot break goat versus fish. They cannot break goat versus fish. Goat land. Goat land. Goat lambed. Ramy Goat, goat lambed. Goat, there's the verses. There's the verses for a goat. There's the verses for a goat. Goat versus fish. We think we need this verses. We need to put this verses perhaps here for goat versus fish so we can do goat versus fish like this. What happened? What happened here for goat versus fish? An interesting celebration. An interesting celebration. We'll never know if they are goat or if they are fish. Let's get some more technologicalification on goat versus fish. We have a whole other verses. We have a whole other verses that we can do on goat versus fish. A whole other verses. We think it's time to reconnect. It's time to reconnect with goat versus fish. We have not reversed this verses. We have not reverse this amazing verses of Goat vs. Fish. And it's time for a reversal. Another camera of Goat vs. Fish? Oh, yes. Path test Goat vs. Fish does not answer to you. You who come in with demands of Goat vs. Fish. Well, now at least you're making some fence. You know that rat was on the fence. For all of their celebrations. They were goat, and then they were on the fence, and then they were fish. And then it scurried off. It scurried off to somewhere else. They were a guest on Goat vs. Fish. They were a guest on Goat vs. Fish. They were a guest on Goat vs. Fish. Path test, how about you say the truth to Goat vs. Fish? How about you start by telling the truth to Goat vs. Fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Fish celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Goats eat rats? Are rats fish? Rame Goat says it's okay to be a rat girl. Yes, this song. We will give it one more promotion on Goat vs. Fish. The verses is in the chat. The verses is in the chat. Fenspot is Fenspot really part of the congregation of Goat vs. Fish? The sound of triumph. 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 So let's have a look. Goat versus fish. There must be another versus. There must be another versus. There must be another versus. Trying for fish? Was it really? Was it really a trying for fish? Was it really a trying for fish? Absolutely, you say. So sure are you. So sure are you. So there's that versus. Application for the hub of Goat vs. Fish. Loading the verses. Ah, yes, there's Goat vs. Fish. Yes, yes, we have achieved Goat vs. Fish. We have achieved Goat vs. Fish. There's the verses. So show it to Goat vs. Fish. Show it to Goat vs. Fish. It's right there in the verses. Let's try adding a verses. Let's try adding a verses. Goat versus fish. Show us the verses. Discuss fish. Oh, yeah. Oh, we'll discuss fish. Goat versus fish. We're attempting a technologification live on Goat versus fish. It's being a bit fancy. It's being a bit fancy. Match versus Goat versus fish. Why the fence? Why the fence should it be so fancy to Goat versus fish? The verses are here. The verses are here. Remove the verses. Try one more verses. Try one more verses. We're gonna make it, Goat and Fish. We're going to make it together with patience for Goat versus Fish. Ah, there's Goat. There's Goat versus Fish. There appears to be Goat versus Fish. There appears to be Goat versus Fish. You see, there's the verses. There's a whole bonus verses. It's Goat versus Fish. It came from behind. It came from behind. It came from behind. So there's more Goat versus Fish. Strong, looking broad, Goat versus Fish. You sure are Goat. Goat versus Fish is very Goat. J-Sticks, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Too much talk, fish, that's all. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Let's have a look at that versus. Preview not available. Image. Appreciation. Alchemical Fryer for following Goat versus Fish. That means a lot to Goat versus Fish. That means a great deal to Goat versus Fish. That means a great deal to Goat versus Fish. Why the fence? Why the fence is it all? It should be a wide versus, not a versus Goat versus Fish. Goat versus fish. The image of goat versus fish. Temperature compensation, brightness, contrast. The focus, autofocus for goat versus fish. Exposure for goat versus fish. Well, we have something to learn from goat versus fish. But we suppose we can just make this the background of goat versus fish, just for a fun versus. Just for a fun versus. Just for a fun versus. There, now. Now behind goat versus fish is goat versus fish. You see? You see goat versus fish? It's goat versus fish from behind. And it says, are you goat or fish? But there, goat versus fish is surrounded by the goat and fish. That's a fun versus. That's a fun versus. It's very nice. It's very nice indeed. It's very nice. Very nice goat versus fish. Alchemical Friar, welcome. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? We wish to know. Even Path Test has declared fish. Even Path Test has declared fish. But now that we have this extra technologicalification of goat versus fish, we think it might be time. It might be time to cover some news of goat versus fish. It might be time for some news of goat versus fish. It might be time for some news of goat versus fish. But not before, not before. An appreciation for Thunder Tracks. Appreciation for Thunder Tracks for the musications. Jay Sticks the fish. Let's get fish in the verses. Let's get fish in the verses. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Fish in the verses. Versus the news. Versus the news. Oh, Will versus the news. But versed a meditation. Versed a meditation. Versed a meditation on goat versus fish. And a celebration for fish. Goat versus fish, 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 goat versus fish. Goat versus fish, 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 goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Celebration. Celebration. Now, Goat versus Fish. If we're going to do the news of Goat versus Fish, there's a few verses that need celebration around here. That needs the attention of Goat versus Fish. Happiness. The first verse is that we need more Goat versus Fish. We need more. We need more Goat versus Fish if we're going to cover the news of Goat versus Fish. Grow! Grow! Grow, Goat versus Fish! How's that for the growth? How's that for the growth of Goat versus Fish? A nice verses? A nice verses of growth of Goat versus Fish? We think that's fun. We think that's fair. We think that's fun and fair. And how about we take the goat and the fish, like there's a fish, for a verses. We've got this fish. Shall we put this fish above? Also above Goat versus Fish like this, so there's that fish. We could do that fish, but fish, why don't you just get into the verses? Bit more fish. Give some room to Goat versus Fish. Come on, fish. Give us some room, fish. It's a room fish. A fish room. We need fish room. We need room. We need room from fish. The sex lives of fish. You watched this video 127 times. Appreciation. Appreciation. Girthy Goat versus Fish. Chunky Goat versus Fish. And then we've got more goat and more fish. There's a goat. Let's put this goat above the verses. All above the verses. What about the fish? What about the swordfish? There's a fish. Put that fish above the verses. Let's put that fish above the verses. And what about goat? Looking rather small goat. And big in the goat. Big in the goat. Let's put that goat above the verses. Goat above the verses. Celebration for goat. Goat is above the verses once more. And I suppose we don't need the Twitch logo for Goat versus Fish. It should really just be Goat versus Fish. But what about this floating, flying fence creature? What about this floating, flying fence creature? Want some attention from Goat versus Fish. Look at it go. Is it goat? Is it fish? Psh. Put that in the verses. Put that in the verses. Put that in the verses. And now these are above Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is behind these goat and fish. Those goat and fish, perhaps they should be behind Goat versus Fish, though. Especially that one fish. Let's get that one fish behind Goat versus Fish. In front of the fish, behind the goat. Such depth to Goat versus Fish. That Goat versus Fish could be behind a goat, but in front of a fish. Goat versus Fish in 3 dimensions. So here we have bigger and more Goat versus Fish. And looking at the news of Goat versus Fish, looking now at the news of Goat versus Fish. First, we have news about the news. News about the news of Goat versus Fish. And here's the news about the news of Goat versus Fish. And here it is. Eldergrown with a subscription to Goat versus Fish. Eldergrown with 38 months of Goat versus Fish. Eldergrown! Celebration! A dedication of Eldergrown, a dedication of Eldergrown Goat, a dedication of Eldergrown Goat. And we float down here, gives you a celebration. Eldergrown gives you a celebration. That's another 500 verse points for Goat. That's another 500 verse points for Goat. Appreciation, and 38 months of Goat versus Fish. That means 38 month points for Goat. 38 month points for Goat. 38 month points for Goat. Counting now the length of the subscription to Goat versus Fish is added. That becomes a versus all its own. You get 500 verse points for your subscription, and you get month points for how long you have been subscribed to Goat versus Fish. It's fair versus. A fair and beautiful versus. Eldergrown. Appreciation. So yes, Goat versus Fish continues to grow. Goat versus Fish continues to grow. 38 new subscribers in the last 28 days. It's time for you. Are you watching Goat versus Fish? It's time for you to subscribe to Goat versus Fish. If you are not already subscribed to Goat versus Fish, the link is in the verses. The link is in the verses. In the congregation. And in the verse, 1 day and 12 hours compared to your typical performance. The sex lives of fish 27 times per day. Goat versus Fish science news is 1 of 10 with 131 views and an average duration of 3 minuets and 49 seconds. So we're still getting verses. They're still viewing Goat versus Fish. And it's all thanks to you. Look how they continue to view the fish. Look how they continue to view the fish. They can't get enough of this fish. They can't get enough about the sex lives of fish. And so we'll give them fish. We'll give them more fish. Beautiful, beautiful news of Goat versus Fish. Beautiful news about Goat versus Fish. Edited by none other than Lucid Nap. Yes, Goat and Fish. We've got editors now on Goat versus Fish. We've got editors on Goat versus Fish. And it's a celebration. Holy Goat Sculpture. 181 views on Goat versus Fish. Will there also be a Sex Lives of Goat? When there is news about the Sex Lives of Goat, then we will definitely make some news about the Sex Lives of Goat. But we have not seen recent news about the Sex Lives of Goat. Goat versus Fish is going to get some hydration. And then we're going to start looking at some news of Goat versus Fish. But why don't you be like Eldergrown? Be like Eldergrown, who subscribes to Goat versus Fish. You really should. We believe you should. We believe you should. We believe that you should. In honor of Goat, who subscribes to Goat versus Fish. Here is a goat talking smack about a fish.
I have one true question for you, Lord Green. Are you goat or are you fish? Goat's for sure.
That's an interesting question. That's the first time I've ever been asked that. Am I a goat or a fish? I'm gonna go with goat. I'm a goddamn goat. And then this one here. You know, a fish is nothing. You know, if you put a fish in an arena with a goat, who's gonna win? But then again, you know, sharks are classified as fish. If you put a goat in an arena with a shark, oh, it'll be a close match.
Grim. Grim of the verses. That reminds Goat versus Fish, actually. That reminds Goat versus Fish very much of a true versus that we ponder now. There are some who say, Goat versus Fish, you have said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish. Now, this is a true versus. In saying Goat versus Fish, we have already said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish. Because we have said Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. TMLZ rules says fish. Celebration for fish. Fish, 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 fish. Bowser Big Bean Burrito, welcome back to Goat versus Fish. Are you goat or fish? Some say to Goat versus Fish, you have said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish, and this is a true versus. For once Goat versus Fish has said Goat versus Fish, we have said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish. And yet there is so much more to say about Goat versus Fish. But even if Goat versus Fish said everything there was to say about Goat versus Fish, it would still be Goat versus Fish because you have not said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish. And that is why we ask, are you goat or are you fish? What do you have to say about Goat versus Fish? As long as there is one who can perceive Goat versus Fish and has something to say about Goat versus Fish, then Goat versus Fish is curious about the goat and fish. There is so much more to be said of Goat versus Fish, and who said that it needs to be Goat versus Fish that has to say it about Goat versus Fish? It could be you who say it about Goat versus Fish. It could be you who say it about Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish, you have said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish, but not everyone has said Goat versus Fish. Not everyone has said Goat versus Fish. There are those who have not even said Goat versus Fish. Say Goat versus Fish. Say Goat versus Fish. Say Goat versus Fish. Now, say Goat versus Fish. Even as you doubt Goat versus Fish, even as you denounce Goat versus Fish, you say Goat versus Fish. And whenever you say Goat versus Fish, through the power of your own demonstration, you reveal that there is something to say about Goat versus Fish. And you said it yourself. You said it yourself! When you say that Goat versus Fish has said everything about Goat versus Fish that there is to say about Goat versus Fish, you have said something new about Goat versus Fish. And Goat versus Fish can say Goat versus Fish about what you said about Goat versus Fish, saying that there was already everything said about Goat versus Fish. And so Goat versus Fish can say that about Goat versus Fish, and Goat versus Fish can say that about Goat versus Fish. And then you can say what Goat versus Fish said. You can say what Goat versus Fish said. And then you can say what Goat versus Fish said about Goat versus Fish, saying that you said that Goat versus Fish had already said everything there is to say about Goat versus Fish. And the verses continue. And the verses continue. Celebration for the continuing verses of Goat versus Fish. We're just saying. We're just saying. Just saying Goat versus Fish. We're just saying Goat versus Fish. Just saying Goat versus Fish. Let's put a marker in that verses. We want you to remember that verses. So we're going to mark that verses for Goat versus Fish. Add a marker with description. Saying about Goat versus Fish. Celebration. We said it. We said it. It was said. We said it about Goat versus Fish. We had never said that about Goat versus Fish, but now we've said that about Goat versus Fish. So much more to say. So much more to say. Eldergrown with the Goat versus Fish sticker. Beautiful verses. Beautiful verses. Now we do have this verses. Now when you make big verses on Goat versus Fish, once more. Now when you make big verses again on Goat versus Fish, we can show Eldergrown with a giant goat versus fish. Eldergrown with a giant goat versus fish. Look at that giant goat versus fish. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We should buy an abandoned Six Flags and turn it into a petting zoo aquarium. Now you're talking my verses, Path Test. Now you're talking my verses. Exclamation tip to make a donation to Goat vs. Fish, or join the Patreon of Goat vs. Fish in order to fund the purchasing of a abandoned Six Flags theme park and turn it into Goat vs. Fish land, sea land. The Goat vs. Fish theme park, it's versatile. The Goat vs. Fish theme park is versatile. Do you want to see a Goat vs. Fish theme park? Then by all verses, make a contribution to Goat vs. Fish, or better yet, find someone to join the congregation of Goat vs. Fish. You heard of Goat vs. Fish. Find someone you know to join the congregation. Find someone you know to join the congregation of Goat vs. Fish, to join Goat vs. Fish Thursdays. That's a fun background for Goat vs. Fish. You wonder what the fence is going on here. What the fence is going on? Goatreon blasphemous. Fishreon. Goatreon, Fishreon. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish Land of Sea. Goat vs. Fish Land and Sea. You can vision it now. You can vision a Goat vs. Fish theme park even now. You truly can. You truly can. You truly can. Celebration Park, Celebration Island. There is a Celebration Island out there, Goat and Fish. There is a Celebration Island out there in the universe. Goat vs. Fish should go there. Let there be Goat vs. Fish. There on Celebration Island. On Celebration Island. On Celebration Island. On Celebration Island. 1,877. The verses remains. The verses remains. All day passes. All day, every verses. All day Goat versus Fish. You get in Goat versus Fish. All passes are for 1 day of Goat versus Fish. You come to Goat versus Fish. You come to Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish Kneeland. Goat versus Fish Leland. Path Test says most people want to waste their time with sex and drugs and abusing their spusses. Then think about Goat versus Fish. Maybe just don't do that first part and instead just think about Goat versus Fish. You could have just said think about Goat versus Fish. Goat America and Fishnyland? Goat America. Goat America, American Goat. America is Goat versus Fish. Everything is Goat versus Fish. Make Goat and Fish verses again. Megafava. Make Goat and Fish verses again. 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 Back to this verses. So let's look at some news of Goat versus Fish. Oh, my verses. Oh, it's getting fancy again. Oh, it's getting fancy again. We don't have toleration for this fanciness. This is one versus a fanciness. The Goat versus Fish will not toleration. Oh, my verses. Oh, my verses. And once again, there's goat versus fish. Typical fenciness, typical fenciness. Some verses when goat versus fish has ever so many windows open on goat versus fish, it starts to say, "Oh, you have too many windows open, goat versus fish. We cannot continue the verses." This is of course false. But that's how they do it to goat versus fish. That's how they do goat versus fish. We don't like that versus. Let's find some news for goat versus fish. Now, we do want to talk about the secret new fish, but maybe we want to start with another news of goat versus fish. We have so much news of goat versus fish, so many news to do's. We did that versus. Oh, my verses. Oh, we can just read this verses? It's not going to fence us out of this verses? We can just read this verses? Don't you just love it when the fence says, "We're not going to be fancy to you. We're going to let you read the verses." Going to let you read the verses. So here comes goat versus fish. Here comes the news of goat versus fish. First time message, fish. We are Razzle Fish. Celebration for fish. Hold the verses. We've got a new fish. All attention upon you, Razzle Fish. All attention upon you. Welcome to Goat versus Fish and Celebration for Fish. Why do you choose fish? 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 Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Razzle, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Razide, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Following since the 7th. You have been lurking a bit on Goat versus Fish, or maybe you came in on a radiation some verses ago, but this is your first chat for fish. Beautiful first fish chat. Beautiful first fish chat. Why do you choose fish? We are, Razide said I had a goat headbutt me in the crotch before. Aww. Is that a sad versus or is that a humorous versus? Celebration for 8-Wait who follows Goat versus Fish. 8-Wait, are you goat or are you fish? 8-Wait, 8-Wait, 8-Wait. 8-Wait, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? And welcome to Goat versus Fish. And welcome to Goat versus Fish. And welcome to Goat versus Fish. What brings you to Goat versus Fish? Who follow Goat versus Fish? Celebration. Celebration. And Bass to Mouth 99 also follows Goat versus Fish. That sounds fish. Bass to Mouth. We're going to mark you as fish for the bass. But you may change your verses to goat if you are actually goat. Maybe you're a goat who just wants to kiss the mouth of a fish. Maybe you're trying to kiss the fish. Maybe we're trying to kiss that sweet, succulent fish mouth. Smooches from fish. Smooches from fish. So 8-Wait and Bass to Mouth 99. What brings you to Goat versus Fish? Celebration. Welcome to the congregation of Goat versus Fish. Welcome to the congregation of Goat versus Fish. TMLZ Rules, as you can see, is being some sort of powerful channeling the verses through their very fins. And Rami Goat is Goat. Perhaps they are not watching Goat versus Fish. Perhaps they are merely following Goat versus Fish from afar. Celebration for following Goat versus Fish from afar. Have you ever been sad? Goat versus Fish. We have to How can we defense this? How can we defense this? We suppose we can close the Twitch chat of Goat vs. Fish until further verses? The YouTube chat of Goat vs. Fish until further verses? Until modification action must be taken? Desperate verses. Desperate times calling for desperate verses. You can't even perceive. You can't even begin to comprehension what's happening here on Goat vs. Fish. Have you ever been sad? Guess what? Aww. Look at it now. Look at this news of Goat vs. Fish. Look at this sad news of Goat vs. Fish. It asks you a question. Now that's some news about fish. That's some news about fish. A versus has been written. 27 cries. Onion fish? No, well, onion fish. No, this isn't the Onion. This is the New York Times. They gather. They gather for news about Goat versus Fish. They're gathering for news. So let's start the verses. Let's get into the verses. Let's start the verses. Intensification for the news of Goat versus Fish. Intensification. Intensification. Somewhat pitiably now there will be less goat and fish going, hey, what's that back there? At which verses we can say, hey, it makes musications. But this just happens on Goat vs. Fish. This happens on Goat vs. Fish.
They're all gonna laugh at you!
We know they laugh at Goat vs. Fish. We know they laugh at Goat vs. Fish. Eldergrown, we know, and they have laughed at Goat vs. Fish, but they don't all just laugh at Goat vs. Fish. They cry at Goat vs. Fish. They seethe at Goat vs. Fish. They judge Goat vs. Fish. They disrespect Goat vs. Fish. The fish saw a shiny behind the human. Was the human a goat or a fish? One of these verses, Jack Spookington, you will realize that a human is not but a goat or a fish, and that there is no human, there is only goat or fish. Eldergrown, the laughing goat. The laughing goat. So this verse is, we've got, can this fish make you cry? Can this fish make you cry? That's the verses. Let's start the verses like this. Everyone could use a little self-help these verses, so let's start the verses. Let's start the verses like this. Are you sad and depressed about everything in your entire existence? Well, maybe you should blame the fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't say it on the fence. Can this fish make you cry? A question. Versed to us by the New York Times. An eerie-looking creature from the ocean's depths has become an unwitting inspiration for intense emotions. Oh yes, we do not hide from our emotions on Goat vs. Fish. You can look into the eye of a goat, you can look into the eyes of a fish, and see the emotion raging between them as they verses. And here we are pointing. A specimen of the black sea devil, anglerfish, was recently found off the coast of Tenerife. The discovery has inspired a lot of emotional reactions on social media. It is easy to believe that the black sea devil, anglerfish, with its gaping maw of razor-like teeth, a bioluminescent rod sticking out of its head, and eyelidless eyes used to scan the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean, might make someone cry with fright. Fish are something to be scared of, it is true. When fish are coming for you, when fish are coming for you. Some fish can look to a goat who has only ever been on the land as a fearful, disfigured, alien creature. Is aliens goat or fish? Do aliens even exist? Well, some would look at a fish and say that is what it is, say that is what it is. Weeping at the sides. Weeping at the sight. Such a horrendous fish. Let's look at the eyelids. Let's look at the eyelids of Goat vs. Fish. What if goat versus fish had no eyelids? Would this frighten you, goat and fish? Does this frighten you? It is perhaps less believable that such a creature, the kind so freakish it inspired a particularly scary scene in the children's movie Finding Nemo. Oh, that was a story about a lost fish. They did eventually find the fish, didn't they? Goat vs. Fish didn't find Finding Nemo to be all of that much of a celebration. We found Finding Nemo, we saw the verses, and we celebration that it was about fish. But when the whole verses hinges on the forgetfulness of a fish, hey, what happened to the major plot point? I don't know, I forgot. It just seems like a kind of a degenerate verses to Goat versus Fish. Hey, why don't you remember Goat versus Fish? Why don't you just remember Goat versus Fish? Now, we know that goat and fish can be forgetful. It is part of Goat versus Fish. But if you're going to make a movie about a fish, maybe forgetting the critical verses is not so much of a great motivation for moving the verses forward. On social media, a sea devil has done just that, becoming a folk hero in recent weeks. After swimming great lengths from its typical home, some 200 to 2,000 meters deep in the ocean, to the surface, some of the fish's fans have turned the watery odyssey, which ended in death, into a poignant version of their hero's journey. Celebration for the heroic fish! We honor this heroic fish, who swam a great distance, only to die before our very eyes. We find fish and goat heroic when they accomplish some great verses and then die pitiably. But are you truly celebrating the life of the fish? But are you truly celebrating the life of the fish? Or are you merely celebrating the death of the fish? Like, oh, we never have to know why that fish ever versed as far as it did. We just need to know that it died getting there. It must have been really committed to being a fish. What if Goat versus Fish died as Goat versus Fish? Would you see a hero in Goat versus Fish? Would you mock Goat versus Fish for spreading the verses of Goat versus Fish until the very death of Goat versus Fish? At which verses then and only then would you claim Goat versus Fish a hero? Perhaps we should understand the heroic verses of Goat and Fish now in the living verses of Goat versus Fish, and not simply keenly celebration a hero after they have passed and moved on into the afterverse. Oh, it is easy and pleasing to celebration the deeds of one who cannot even speak up for themselves. Why, fish? Why, fish? Why, fish? Why did you swim so far? Well, what if the fish told you it swam so far to versus the goat? It is Goat versus Fish. Perhaps some goat would not be so pleased about the incursion of this fish into their territory. But because the fish has died, the goat need not worry that this fish will complete its invasion of the land. So they can celebrate a heroic fish. And we can all say unto ourselves, ah, celebration to me and celebration to thee. We celebration the dead fish, we celebration the dead fish. And death is part of Goat versus Fish. And Goat versus Fish mourns the loss of a goat and mourns the loss of a fish. Goat versus Fish merely implores you to celebration the life of the goat and the fish as they verses, Find a goat or a fish that you love, that you know, and call them the hero. Call them the hero. You are the hero. You are the hero who watches Goat vs. Fish. You are the hero who likes and comments and subscribes to Goat vs. Fish. You are the hero who tells someone that you know about Goat vs. Fish. What could be more of a heroic versus than sharing the one true verses of Goat vs. Fish? And along those verses, we choose to believe, if we may choose to believe whatever we wish about this angler fish who has traveled so far, Goat vs. Fish believes that this fish traveled so far to tell you about Goat vs. Fish. The angler fish traveled so far just so it could become news of Goat vs. Fish, so that Goat vs. Fish could use this fish to tell you about Goat vs. Fish. And in that verses, it is a heroic fish. Celebration for the heroic fish who died to give Goat vs. Fish something to talk about on Goat vs. Fish. What a celebration. The angler fish that swam to the land gave its life for Goat vs. Fish. Gave its life for Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish does not ask anyone to give their life to Goat vs. Fish. We only want you to live for Goat vs. Fish, not to die for Goat vs. Fish. But it is a touching verses. It's a touching verses and celebration for fish. Quotation. My first reaction was, oh my God, this fish is terrifying. Don't get us started on whether or not God is goat or fish, said Hannah Bachman, 29, who lives in Minneapolis, which is like Macroopolis but smaller, and posted about the fish on Fish Talk. But, they said, they eventually succumbed to the poetry of a lone fish approaching the light. This poor fish is just spending her literal last seconds trying to do something beautiful. Some say Goat vs. Fish is a cult. Some say Goat vs. Fish is a cult. And it would not be your fault if you perceive Goat vs. Fish as this. There are many perceptions of Goat vs. Fish. But Goat vs. Fish does not claim to be a cult, and Goat vs. Fish does not claim to be a death cult. If you're looking for a death cult, look no further than this. They do not see the beauty in the life of the fish until they ponder the beauty of its terminal final seconds. They do not see the beauty in the life of the fish until its terminal final seconds are Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. They do not see the beauty of the life of the fish without first pondering its terminal final seconds. Would it be any less beautiful if the fish did not die, if it had only tried, if it had only tried? I did shed a few tears, they added. Aww. In late January, the sea devil made headlines when it was spotted near the surface by a group of researchers off the coast of Tenerife, a Spanish Canary Islands. Appreciation for your patience with the pronunciation of Goat vs. Fish. We're mostly used to talking about goat and fish. It was a rare event and a dream come true, said one photographer with the group who was able to capture the fish on camera. The team observed the fish, which was already injured when it was spotted for several hours. The sea devil ultimately died. Yeah, this is what I'm friggin' talking about. This fish knows how to friggin' suffer. It's no wonder that this friggin' Christian nation of ours has become so friggin' fascinated with this fish, you know. They didn't really care much about the fish until they realized that, it was a hurt and sick and dying fish, and then they went, oh, yeah, we like it. We like it when you friggin' suffer. Don't you like watching me friggin' suffer? You like it when I friggin' suffer, don't you? Yeah, that's what I'm all friggin' about. You know, it gives my life a friggin' purpose and a meaning to suffer for you It does suck. But, that's what it's all friggin' about. So, just impose the suffering, the beautiful friggin' suffering of fish. Yeah. I don't much go for this goat versus fish guy. I think he's trying to friggin' steal my bit. But, the more friggin' suffering that we friggin' celebrate, the more I can friggin' relate. So I give it up to this friggin' long friggin' suffering fish. Why don't you friggin' suffer some more? Hey, friggin' goats, why don't you friggin' suffer? I might see fit to celebrate your existence if you just friggin' suffer some more. It's like our friggin' currency out here. The more you suffer, the more it shows you really care. Right? Yeah. Still, at least online, its memory lives on. Until we start thinking about something else. Its fans have posted tributes set to ballads, written poems, created fan art, and even gotten tattoos. Several people, be they goat or fish, have posted videos of themselves bawling over the fish. Others have called for Pixar to adapt its story into a film. They can't get enough of this fish. Celebration for fish, celebration for fish. They're obsessing over fish. Goat must be envious. Goat, what do you have to say about this versus? No, we agree. Translation for those of you who do not speak goat. The goat said, "What do I have to do? Die to get your attention and sympathy?" You might have to. Why did the sea devil decamp for the surface? We do not know for certain, although scientists have speculated that it might have to do with illness or an unusual current. Sick, weak, dying fish. Weepy fans of the fish on TikTok, however, have woven a beautiful and probably fanciful narrative for the fish. A story of a creature in its final days. Well, now they're just repeating goat versus fish. They're just saying the verses. They're just saying the same verses. It was a sad fish. It was a sick fish. There was sympathization for the sad, sick fish. There was sympathization for the sad, sick, dying fish. It was sad because it was dying. It got attention because it was sick. They found sympathization because it was an ill fish. It died. They cried. Get on with the verses. And there's the fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Look at the fish. The motivations of the anglerfish that made its way to the surface can't be known.
Ooh. Ah.
But that has not stopped the goat and fish from speculating. And this is very goat versus fish. The mysteries of the fish. What has happened to fish? Unknown. Ooh, wait to versus. The mysteries of fish. Their verses unknown. Allows for projection upon the fish, whatever it is that you wish. What it is that you are trying to accomplish in life. And perhaps you will die amid the strife. Perhaps your goals will never be reached. Perhaps your verses will never be preached. And they look at the dead fish. And they look at its journey. And the absence of knowledge about the fish intrigues the goat and fish who would view it. Allows themselves to insert themselves into the fish and say, I feel like this fish. I am this fish. I am this fish. And we celebration the declaration of fish, for the one true question is, are you goat or are you fish? Because of this angler fish There are many out there in the universe who have chosen fish. The angler has become a martyr for fish. In the verses of Goat versus Fish, the fish have achieved a new martyr, and it looks like this. The angler fish is here as a guest on Goat vs. Fish. Hey, angler fish. You've really been in the news in recent verses. Tell us about your journey. Oh wait, it's dead. It can't say. Well, thank you for joining Goat vs. Fish. Appreciation. The projection of your dreams onto this late fish is a lot like Goat versus Fish. Some say there is an absence in meaning of Goat versus Fish. What does it mean? I cannot perceive. Tell me, Goat versus Fish. What is Goat versus Fish all about? What is the meaning of Goat versus Fish? But Goat vs. Fish is not here to tell you the meaning of Goat vs. Fish. That must be discovered for yourself. Perhaps our dear angler fish was versing to the land of the goat in order to discover the true meaning of Goat vs. Fish. Maybe they found it, but now those mysteries are lost. But fish are versus goat, and goat are versus fish. You who hunger to see the meaning behind the journey of this angler, look no further than Goat versus Fish. The angler fish was living to versus the goat. That is your answer. The versus is solved. The fish was going to versus goat. Oh, my verses. Resuscitation! 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 My journey was meaningless. Life is meaningless. There was nothing to my swimming to a late grave. There is no joy or sadness or anger to be found in it. I am merely part of the infinite expanse of the universe, and what I do or don't do, or did and didn't do, amount to an inconsequence beyond any of our fathoming. I died as I lived, completely devoid of meaning. Appreciation for that clarification. Now we know. Madison Sharp, 25, a behavioral therapist in Dallas, noticed the outpouring of emotion for their fish in social media and feed in recent weeks. Madison Sharp, 25, a behavioral therapist in Dallas, noticed an outpouring of emotion for the fish in her social media feeds in this week. Instead of just seeing a fish reaching the surface, they see hope and meaning and symbolism. She said of the other social media users who had selected the fish as a receptacle for their big feelings. On Monday night, she was inspired to create her own freehand illustration of the sea devil approaching the surface. She added tears to its eyes and the word finally floating above the waterline. I think the most important part was the expression of the fish, she said. I added the little eyebrows on top to show the longing of it. Can we get that illustration? Here's the verses.
Who made it to the surface, because I love her just as you all do. Here's my dear.
Oh, hey, it's the Uncle Joe Show. So much inspiration by fish. But where's the inspiration for Goat vs. Fish? Where's the fan art of Goat vs. Fish? Where's the fan art of Goat? Where's your inspiration from Goat vs. Fish? Well, you just got it from Goat vs. Fish. Celebration for the life of fish. Celebration for the death of fish. Celebration for the circle of verses. Goat, just don't go dying out there in order to get attention. Maybe just try versing the fish. We think that's a verses. We'll edit that down for a verses of Goat versus Fish. We'll edit that down for a verses of Goat versus Fish. Add a marker with description. Angler, fish, news. Add the verses. So that was some fish news. That was some secret fish news. That verses ended up being very different for Goat vs. Fish than was perceived by Goat vs. Fish. We thought the whole verses was going to be about the fish going to versus the goat. It was about the fish going to versus the goat, but it ended up being about a psychological projection, which is very verseful to Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish, a lot of relation from Goat vs. Fish. You see how everything is Goat vs. Fish. You see how everything is Goat vs. Fish. Demonstration again. It's about a fish. It's about association with fish. Some would say, I could never be a fish. I could never be a fish. And yet, so many now feel like they are this fish. The desperation of the fish, the hope of the fish, the dream of the fish. So many feel like the fish. So many feel like the fish. Celebration for fish. Let's add a bonus verses. Goat versus fish. Or we could that could be on the thumbnail of Goat versus Fish. But we'll try this versus. Did this fish make you cry? Why? 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 That's a great way to start a YouTube of Goat versus Fish. Why? Pickletoe News says fish. Pickletoe News says fish. Goat and fish, goat and fish. What do you say? Well, let's see what you say. Let's see what you say about this fish. Let's see what you say about the story of the fish. Pickletoe News says fish. Jim 10 Laundry, welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. You are in the top 55 angler fish on YouTube. Celebration. Celebration. Where do you get this information? Maybe it watched Poltergeist as random TV and thought it was going into the light. Perhaps it did. Today, Mexicans say cabra over pescados is the Mexican celebration. Celebration? Cabra. Celebration por cabra. Celebración por cabra. Fish go upstream. Fish go upstream. It would not be the first fish that died. Salmon fish also die to get to the end of their verses. That is another verses about that angler fish. The dying salmon. Salmon die every verses. Salmon die every verses. We could do that versus. We could do a whole other versus about the fish, goat versus fish. When's Uncle Joe having a foot competition again? Well, that would be a versus for Uncle Joe, and while you're at it, ask if Uncle Joe's goat or fish. They're probably still fish. Ziggy Bungwa, are you goat or fish? That fish should choose fish, says Inventive Harvest. They might find meaning. It should try to versus the goat. Yes, yes, Inventive Harvest. And are you goat or are you fish? Dead fish aren't much fun, says Eldergrown. No, no. You might not think so, but then what about fish heads, are you goat or fish heads, eat them up young. But then they can't talk and they can't walk. First Harambe and now this fish, we know. We know Inventive Harvest. We know. So sad, so sad. Spoiler, they find Nemo. Says, well, Mom. Oh, don't go ruining the verses of fish for everyone. But then maybe they forgot. Maybe they forgot. We need more goats. Well, we do have many goat. Let's count the goat and fish. Goat. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s. 15 goat. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13. 13 fish. There are still more goat than fish. There's more goat than fish. There's more goat than fish. So it's not all fences. It's not all fences if you're goat. Cerca is fence. What about valla? We thought valla was fence. Is valla also fence? No siéntense en valla. Cabra y pez contra en playa, pero no siéntense en valla. Ziggy Bungwa is fish. Fish, closing the gap on goat, closing the gap on goat, celebration for fish, celebration for fish. Fish closing the gap on goat, celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Let's see if we can find even more news of goat versus fish. Rami goat, I'm goat, celebration for goat, celebration for goat. Vaya con fish. Oh, Inventive Harvest. Are you going for fish this versus? Are you going via con fish? Are you actually going fish this versus? What a rare versus for Inventive Harvest. A rare versus. A rare versus. I will go fish in honor of the angler. Wow, a goat has gone fish. Wow, one fish really can make a difference. Inventive Harvest has gone fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Inventive Harvest has gone fish in honor of the angler. Wow. Rest in verses, fish. Rest in verses. Rest in verses. Goat and fish. We have to show you this. We have to show you this. We think this might just be a meme of goat versus fish. We need to do some research on goat versus fish. Now. This might just be a meme of goat versus fish. We don't think it's a true versus. We don't think this is a true versus, but we like to believe that it's a true versus. Sorry, Nintendo fans. According to recent leaks, the Nintendo Switch 2 will not have a large fish button that, when pressed, does
Nothing.
Sorry. Apologization. No nothing fish button. Come now, Nintendo. We thought you were known for innovation. How are you going to differentiation yourself from the verses of Xbox and PlayStation if not for the fish button that does
Nothing.
And what is with this apologization? Sorry, Nintendo fans. It is Nintendo that should be apologization to Goat versus Fish and all of the goat who wanted to versus the fish. Some say Nintendo games are lame and are just for little kids. Well, if your games are really for little kids, which as we know are baby goat, then you would surely have a fish button. Here comes goat. Here comes goat. Goat wants to play. Goat wants to press fish button. Press the fish. Press the fish. Press the fish. Pressing the fish. Press fish. Pressing the 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 fish. And what happens? After 17 and a half hours of the goat pressing the fish button, why, it's nothing. And what a celebration, and what a celebration it be. Except it was all in a dream, except it was all in a dream. Because according to recent leaks, the Nintendo Switch 2 will not have a large fish button that when pressed does nothing. Celebration for radiation! Celebration! Celebration! OMG, a viewer! Aliasanti Fish. Cujo F. Salem's Lot says goat. We have a goat and we have a fish. Slay J, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Mikau, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Pezabeth, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. OMG, a viewer chooses Pikachu. That's on the fence. Pikachu, on the fence. The Deadpool show. Are you goat or are you fish? Celebration with the Fire Husky who follows Goat vs. Fish. Oh my verses. OMG, a viewer chooses fish. Celebration for fish. I want to be the very fish. Captain Toodle says fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. I be goat. Ziggy Bungwa. Macau goes goat. Macau goes goat. Celebration for goat. Press the fish button. Everyone press the fish button. Press the fish button on your screen. It does nothing. It does nothing. The Fire Husky says goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Pezabeth says goat, even though Pez in Cabra contra Pez is totally fish. Pez goes goat. That's another couple of goat. And goat, the Deadpool show goes goat. The Deadpool show goes goat. And it is a celebration. And it is a celebration. Cinemerc, celebration for following Goat versus Fish. The Fire Husky. The Fire Husky for following Goat versus Fish. Rami Goat says Cabro to Goat versus Fish. Yeah, but goat. Pezabeth follows Goat versus Fish. Celebration. The Deadpool show has rated Goat versus Fish and has gone goat. That's 23 radiation points for goat. 23 radiation points for goat. And what do you think, chatters? What do you think about this fish button that does nothing, that isn't actually happening? Brought to you by Victor Speed 564, who says pre-order canceled. 43,541 likes. Goat, Rami Goat. Goat, Rami Goat. Celebration for goat. It's totally redundant. A nothing fish button. Are you accusing the fish of doing nothing? One of my best buttons today. Oh, Goat versus Fish knows how to press your buttons. It tastes like chicken. Is a chicken a goat or a fish? Can you taste the button? Can you taste the fish button? That would be doing something. Slay J says goat. Celebration for goat. It's like a light switch chart does nothing. A light switch dart does nothing. But you can press it. You can press the fish, though. You can impress the fish. You can impress the fish. Tastes like angler. Tastes like Goat versus Fish. Tastes like Goat versus Fish. Zane Jaya says fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Jayhawker94 says, I have read that to say it will have large fish button that does something. Maybe fish will do something. Maybe when you press the fish button, it will versus goat. When you press it, it launches goldfish crackers into your mouth. Sounds like a delicious versus. Goat versus Fish has a recommendation. How about when you press that fish button, it versus the goat? Here's the fish. Press the fish. Press the fish. Press the fish. And every versus that you press the fish, it versus the goat. It versus the goat. It versus the goat. Celebration for fish. That's a technological-fication that will get you 1 million sales, Nintendo. Fish button that versus goat. Where does catfish fall under? A goat because a cat is four-legged land animal like a goat, or a fish because it skims like a fish? Well, catfish has fish in the name, so it's probably fish. It's probably fish. Some say it's okay to be a cat, some say it's okay to be a rat, but cat versus rat is a false versus. It's actually just goat versus fish. A shout out for the Deadpool show. A shout out for the Deadpool show. Shout out for the Deadpool show. Shout out for the Deadpool show. Let's get a shout out for the Deadpool show. Celebration, celebration. Celebration. Jim 10 Laundry, there's no need to be so brusque with the goat and fish. Celebration. OMG viewers, celebration. Many celebrations in the chat this versus. Join us in following celebration. Oh, my verses! Oh, my verses! The Uncle Joe Show Radiation Goat versus Fish. The Uncle Joe Show Radiation Goat versus Fish. Celebration, celebration. And look at what they say to Goat versus Fish. Look at what they say to Goat versus Fish. We've got Creepy Spice who says, sit on this fence, dick, you little fish goat. We've got Creepy Spice. Oh, my verses. It's repetition to Goat versus Fish. Toss the Bomb may accuse Goat versus Fish of repeating Goat versus Fish. Hello Kitty Poot may accuse Goat versus Fish of repeating Goat versus Fish. The Uncle Joe Show may appreciation and accuse Goat versus Fish of repeating Goat versus Fish. But now all of the freak dick raiders of the Nephew Network, which is brought to you by Goat versus Fish, they're all saying, sit on this fence, dick, you little fish goat. Well, Goat versus Fish is not going to take your commands. You think that Goat versus Fish is here just to take your commands? Goat versus Fish may be a dreamer. Goat versus Fish may be a streamer. But Goat versus Fish is not here to dance when you say dance, monkey, dance, because there is no monkey. There's only goat and fish. So Goat versus Fish isn't going to do what you say for Goat versus Fish to do. No, we are a free versus. Goat versus Fish is a free versus. Goat versus Fish didn't become a streamer to bring you the verses of Goat versus Fish just so you could raid Goat versus Fish and tell Goat versus Fish to sit on fences. Goat versus Fish will do no such verses. Goat versus Fish will do no such verses. Celebration for Toss the Bomb for following Goat versus Fish. For Toss the Bomb for following Goat versus Fish. Double the Goat versus Fish. Triple the Goat versus Fish. 4 times the Goat versus Fish. 5 times the Goat versus Fish. Not Goat Monkeys, my fish circus. Goat Monkeys. Not Goat Monkeys, Fish Circus. It's a fair versus. Goat Monkey versus Fish Circus. We'll take it on Goat versus Fish. We'll take it on Goat versus Fish. Celebration to the Uncle Joe Show for Radiation Goat versus Fish. It's been a long versus. It's been a long versus. We were just making a celebration. Who here has seen the news about this anglerfish? Everyone's talking about this anglerfish. Everyone's saying, oh, this anglerfish, how beautiful it is that it died attempting to reach the land to versus the goat. Millions upon millions of Instagrammers and TikTokers and social media users are all identifying with the anglerfish, with the dead, suffering, sick anglerfish. They're saying, I'm the fish. I feel like this fish. There's so much unresolution in my life. I'm totally like this fish. I will make an illustration of this fish, this dead fish. I will projection all of my fears and all of my joys and all of my dreams onto this fish. And still they deny the power of Goat versus Fish. Still they deny the power of Goat versus Fish. Did you weep for this fish? One's in the chat if you wept for the fish, because they say that many wept for the anglerfish. But who cries for goat? But who cries for Goat. Doc Buglove cried for the fish. Pickle Tonu cried for the fish. OMG a viewer cried for the fish. Jay Sticks cried for the fish. Remy Goat cried for the fish. OMG a viewer skims with the fish. Jim Tan Laundry says, goats eat the fish. This is a nice ass-looking stream, brother. Appreciation. Appreciation. It's a humble versus. It's a humble versus. Raiders of the Uncle Joe Show. We have something to show. We have something special to show you. Musication has always been a part of Goat versus Fish. Musication has always been a part of Goat versus Fish, and now we're going to bring you some very, 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 very special verses. What's this behind Goat versus Fish? What's that behind Goat versus Fish?
Ooh. Ah.
This versus goes out to all the freak dicks who rated Goat versus Fish. Appreciation, Goat versus Fish. Appreciation. for bringing this musication into our lives, Goat vs. Fish. The musication that thrives, the musication by which we all thrive. Amazing verses. Amazing verses. The Uncle Joe Show! The Uncle Joe Show! Appreciation. The Uncle Joe Show believes in Goat vs. Fish, and Goat vs. Fish believes in you, Joe. Goat vs. Fish believes in you, Joe. Don't you know? Don't you know? Don't you know? And look at the mellow. Look how mellow is Goat vs. Fish. Look how mellow is Goat vs. Fish. Have you ever seen Goat vs. Fish? Looking so chill and calm and composed. It's just a humble verses. It's just a humble verses. Applause for Goat vs. Fish. Applause for Goat vs. Fish. It's the whole verses. This is the whole verses. It's you and the beautiful sound of Goat vs. Fish. Here bringing you great verses. But tell us, Goat vs. Fish, is it not? Oh, my verses. It's Thursday night. It's Goat versus Fish. We think that the Uncle Joseph getting ready to count their verses for cash fencing marbles. Coming on up on Fry verses. Coming on up on Fry verses. Want to win some monetization? Go join Goat vs. Fish. Go join Goat vs. Fish. But of course we know how you are. We know how you are, you. We know how you are. And we know that you could use some practice on Goat vs. Fish. You could use some practice on Goat vs. Fish. You could use some marbleization practice in advance of cash fencing marbles. You could use it. So why don't you !play and join Goat vs. Fish. !play to join Goat vs. Fish for cash fencing marbles warm-up edition. Warm-up cash fencing marbles edition. Let's do the verses. Let's do the verses. !play to join Goat vs. Fish. The Real Slim Savage follows Goat vs. Fish. Celebration. Will the Real Slim Savage please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up. Off of the fence. Off of the fence and choose Goat or Fish. You have 5 minuets to join. 5 minuets to join. 5 minuets to join. 5 minuets to join. Yes, yes. Play for Goat vs. Fish. Play with Goat vs. Fish. Any commands for Swedish Christmas goat, or am I just dreaming? Are you talking about the gavel goat? Are you talking about the galv goat? The burning goat? The goat that burns every verse is the one they light on fire, the one they attempt to light on fire. We do not believe it has successfully burned in several verses. They're going to lose all the fascination. In one verses, they say, don't burn the goat. And then in other verses, they're saying, oh, please, we hope the goat burns. It would be great for a publication if the goat burns. If the goat burns, please burn the goat. Please burn the goat. But don't burn the goat. We can't say that we want you to burn the goat. Pickle Tonu celebration, Goat vs. Fish celebration, Mikau celebration, Slapstick 85 celebration, Random TV, TMLZ rules, Ziggy Bungwa, Rami Goat 333, The Uncle Joe Show. Oh, my verses, The Uncle Joe Show. Look at this verses. You're looking somewhat disfigured, Joe. Do you really think you should eat all of those slam cakes? Toss the Bomb, welcome to Goat vs. Fish, Blasphemous in the verses, The Real Slim Savage, Jim 10 Laundry, Random TV. We're going to see who wins this verses. We're going to see if Goat or Fish wins this verses. Oh, the memes of Goat vs. Fish. We forgot about the folder of the memes of Goat vs. Fish. We need to update that with Goat vs. Fish. There's another Instagram called Goat vs. Fish Memes, or it might be GVF Memes on the Instagram that you can follow. One minuet to join. Turdberg says play. You must type exclamation play. Everything looking so crisp on the stream. Wonderful job with everything. Appreciation. Well, we think it's because of this. Goat versus Fish navigation. Nice quality verses. Verses within the verses within the verses. Nice quality verses. It helps Goat vs. Fish. It helps Goat vs. Fish. You still in that freak studio? Well, you mean this? You mean this? Oh, hey, Goat and Fish. You mean this versus? Marbleization! 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 And who's leading? What's none other than Goat vs. Fish. All marble races are rigged by Goat vs. Fish. All marble races are rigged by Goat vs. Fish. That includes cash fucking marbles on Twitch. It's completely rigged by Goat vs. Fish. Any money that you win on the Uncle Joe Show was actually completely rigged entirely by Goat vs. Fish. So you should thank Goat vs. Fish. And if you lose, you should blame Goat vs. Fish. As long as you are thanking Goat vs. Fish for your triumphs and blaming Goat vs. Fish for your losses, then you will realize that it's all due to Goat vs. Fish. Celebration your losses. We celebration each and every one of your losses. As a matter of verses, whoever so wins this marble race, Goat vs. Fish will declare the loser and everyone else the winner. So you'd better not finish this marble race. You'd better not finish it first. If you do, we're reversing the verses. That's the power of Goat vs. Fish. You may wish to claim victory. You may say, that's not fair, Goat vs. Fish. I won the verses. You can't snatch triumph away from me. You can't snatch defeat from the jaws of triumph as if it was a versus between defeat and triumph and not Goat and Fish. Macau, you're fencing it all up. What are you trying? You're trying to win in defiance of Goat vs. Fish? Macau, no! Can anyone lose before you? Who is the number one loser on Goat vs. Fish? Macau? No, slow down, Macau, slow. Oh, my verses. Macau, what have you done? End of the month, get ready, everyone. Get ready, everyone. I'm rooting for you this year. Appreciation, Joe. Appreciation, Joe. It's been a tough versus for Goat vs. Fish. It's been a tough versus for Goat vs. Fish. We must say. It has been a tough versus. It has been a tough versus, for there are some who know Goat vs. Fish very well. There are some who know Goat vs. Fish very well, who in recent verses have come to reject Goat vs. Fish. They say you're wasting your life, Goat vs. Fish. They say you're better than this, Goat vs. Fish. They say you're smarter than this, Goat vs. Fish. They say I don't respect Goat vs. Fish. It hurts, Goat vs. Fish. It hurts, Goat vs. Fish. But we persist. It is not the first rejection that has been had for Goat vs. Fish, and it is not the last. We continue. The verses continue. For you. And for all of you. Oh. Okay. For all of you who receive joy from Goat vs. Fish. Whether that joy is watching Goat vs. Fish every living stream, whether or not you know what it means, or whether that joy comes to you 5 million years later when you have a fleeting thought about Goat vs. Fish and say, what a crazy verses. However you enjoy Goat vs. Fish, we celebration you for believing in Goat vs. Fish. And we know Goat vs. Fish can be hard. Goat vs. Fish can be very hard. We know Goat vs. Fish can be challenging. It's challenging for Goat vs. Fish. It's not an easy versus. Such a simple versus. How can such a simple versus of Goat vs. Fish be such a challenging versus? And so many take offense. And the offense they take, they would attempt to stab Goat vs. Fish with the very own fence on which they sit. Their displeasure for Goat vs. Fish cannot be theirs alone. No, it must be visited back on Goat vs. Fish. But this is the sacrifice that Goat vs. Fish makes for you. We give all of our verses. We give all of our verses to you. We expose Goat vs. Fish. We reveal Goat vs. Fish. For your praise, for your ire. However you receive Goat vs. Fish, we give the gift of Goat vs. Fish to you. So you can see yourself through Goat vs. Fish. So you can talk to ones that you know about Goat vs. Fish. You can say, hey, what do you think about Goat vs. Fish? Well, I think this about Goat vs. Fish. Well, I think Goat about Goat vs. Fish. Well, I think Fish about Goat vs. Fish. I think Goat vs. Fish is genius. I think Goat vs. Fish is stupid. The gift of conversation of Goat vs. Fish is yours now and forever. And it's all thanks to Goat vs. Fish. It's all thanks to Goat vs. Fish. Let's have a look at those results. Oh, hey, chat. Let's have a look at those results. The winner is Macau. We were just fencing around. We were just testing your mettle, Macau. We were just testing you to see if you would still win, even if we told you that winning was losing and losing was winning. Even if we told you that horning was finning and finning was horning. Macau with the triumph. Celebration. Macau, you want to mosh? We want to mosh on Goat vs. Fish? Let's mosh on Goat vs. Fish. Let's mosh on Goat vs. Fish. Let's mosh on Goat vs. Fish.
fighting in the pit! No versing in the pit! Oh, goat versus fish!
A fish or goat? Hey, ho! Let's go! Get off the fence now! Are you fish? Are you goat? You just asked me, but I still do not know! We're versing all the goat now! We're versing all the fish now! We're sitting on the fence now! Goat versus fish! It's classic verses. It's a classic verses. It's a classic verses. TMLZ rules, Gym 10 laundry. Real goats, real fish. Real goat and fish. Real goat and fish. Blitzkrieg goat, Macau. Final verses. We have Macau, we have Pickle Chonyu, we have Rami Goat 333, we have Blasphemous, Slapstick 85, Random TV, Gym 10 laundry, Sunnyvale representation. Toss the bomb, Goat versus Fish, TMLZ rules. The Real Slim Savage, Ziggy Bungwa, and the Uncle Joe Show, the first to not finish. The first to not finish. Leave it to the Uncle Joe Show to be the first to not finish. Did the Uncle Joe Show finish? These are the questions we have for the Uncle Joe Show as a matter of verses. So many questions remain unanswered. But now we know that the Uncle Joe Show did not finish. Perhaps there was some kind of interruption. Perhaps there was some sort of interruption that caused the Uncle Joe Show not to be able to finish that verses. Ooh. Who's to say? Ah. Who's to say? Oh, a little fence sitter told me. It's just something that we heard from a little fence sitter. Just something we heard from a little fence sitter. Appreciation. Macau, are you goat or are you fish? You have won the marbleization race. Ramik says, I'm a Finnish goat. We wonder about Finland. As Finns are on fish, as Finns are on fish. Goat, I say. Macau says goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Beautiful goat celebration. That's a marble win for goat. That's a marble win for the goat. Celebration for goat. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish has a benefit concert to perform at tomorrow. Yes, for the benefit of Goat versus Fish. Oh, the generous Goat versus Fish. How you donation your time, Goat versus Fish, to great causes. Like there are goat and fish that were injured in the Los Angeles wildfires. And there is going to be a promotion, a reception of donation and contribution in the name of healing the injured goat and fish. Waiting for stickers. The verses, we sent some verses not so long ago. We hope they are received. We hope they are received. And so Goat versus Fish must go and make preparation. We declare that with 3,000 subscription points for Goat, with 3,000 points for Goat, a versus for Goat. Now let's have a look, though. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s, 18s, 19s, 20s. 20 for Goat. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s. 18 for Fish. 18 for Fish. Fish were injured in the fire. Some fish were scooped up in the Sea of the Fish and then dumped onto the land of the goat. Very pitiable indeed. Very pitiable indeed. Maybe that's what that anglerfish was on about. Maybe that anglerfish was just trying to get to the land of the goat to help put out the Los Angeles wildfires, and then they got lost. Did I die? It's versible. Perhaps this is now your eternity. An eternity with Goat versus Fish. An eternity with Goat versus Fish. So we are going to give this versus to Goat. We're going to give this versus to Goat. Celebration. The Goat do triumph. The Goat do triumph over the fish. The goat do triumph over the fish. Goat do triumph over the fish. Celebration. Goat. Going to give a versus for goat. With an honorable versus for the massive radiation of the Uncle Joe show. Appreciation. Appreciation. You have to wait 40 minutes and 45 seconds before giving the Uncle Joe show another shout out. Ha ha, we can do that versus anyway. So, Goat and Fish, we are going to conduct a radiation. We know it's early in the verses. We appreciate all of your donations and contribution to Goat vs. Fish. This has been a Mighty Versus. This has been a celebration of Goat vs. Fish. For those of you lurking on the stream, we implore you to subscribe to Goat vs. Fish on YouTube or on the Instagram or wherever you follow Goat vs. Fish. Jim 10 Laundry, Celebration for Goat. We celebrate the triumph of Goat on this versus of Goat vs. Fish. And now let's take all of those wonderful Nephew Network raiders who raided Goat vs. Fish and let us go to another place. For when you are out in the land and the sea, look about you. Look about you. Find one who is lost. Find one who does not know the way. And ask. Simply ask, are you goat or are you fish? These are the verses of Goat vs. Fish, the Goatfish. And it was written, and it was written.
Do you be goat? 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 Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Or do you be fish? Because the goats do be goat.
Arbard's Dragon 13, we love hearing your opinions about fish. Please follow Goat vs. Fish Celebration. Abra Dragon 13 for following Goat vs. Fish. Appreciation. Appreciation.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Now repeat after goat versus fish. Dooby 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 dooby.
Arba Dragon, this music can be found on Spotify, and on Apple Musications, and on YouTube. We're going to radiation Julian Mr. Humdinger, a fellow nephew of the Nephew Network, and who has Goat vs. Fish in their stream title, so we have to reward that versus.
Came up to me and said a goat or a fish. Which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish?
Appreciation all. Jim 10 Laundry, TMLZ Rules, The Uncle Joe Show, Ramy Goat, Abrar Dragon 13, Random TV, Macau, Slapstick 85, Pickleton U. I watched Goat vs. Fish videos and songs 27 times, and 27 more. And 27 more.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. The video
1,879 YouTube subscribers. We gained some YouTube subscribers this versus. Appreciation. This is the final verses.
But the goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
Make some noise for the goat. 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 Celebration Thunder Tracks. Welcome again to Goat vs. Fish.